Hello and welcome to VIU's English Language Support online tutorials. My name is Matthew Finlayson and this is our second tutorial. We're going to be looking at reading strategies. In particular, we're trying to support students with strategies that will allow them to read for greater interaction with texts or with textbooks or with articles. So this is a 5-step process that I'm laying out here, which will give students different strategies to allow them to read and take away more from the reading that they're doing for their courses. One of the things we find for university students is that there is a really increased volume of reading that is required when our international students move from taking academic preparation courses into the mainstream VIU classes. They have a lot more reading to do. So these strategies should be helpful to help students cope with the increased amount of reading. And the great thing about this process is that if you practice it, it's going to eventually increase your speed of reading, but also at the same time help you to take away more knowledge with the reading that you do. So let's move into the presentation. So step 1, this is the pre-reading and prediction phase. So the very first thing you should do when you're encountering a new article or a new text is you should look at the section that you're being asked to read, and you should in particular focus on the titles, subtitles, any definition boxes that you see in the margins or being highlighted, and also any keywords that seem to be repeated or jump out at you from topic sentences in sections. So it's a really good idea to carefully read all of these titles, subtitles, and additional information, and to think about it, to try to predict what you're going to encounter through the body of the reading. So another useful sub-strategy is that you should actually try to put the titles and maybe even the subtitles into your own words. This is a way of making sure you understand what you're looking at, and also the more that you try to transfer ideas into your own words, you're taking ownership of the material that you're reading, so you're interacting more with it. So after you finish this pre-read, you should ask yourself the following question. What do I think the main points of this text or this article will be? And it's really not even a bad idea for you to jot down one or two main ideas of what you think the article will be looking at. And then when you finish, you can always come back and see if you were correct or if you weren't exactly on point. Okay, step 2. Step 2 is what we call the close read. So this is actually the section where you're going to dive right into the body of the text that you're working with. We really encourage students not to be daunted by the length of articles. Instead of looking at how much you have to do collectively, it's much more shrewd, much more intelligent to break the reading down into chunks. In particular, we recommend paragraph length chunks as being a more useful size of material to deal with. So you should focus on reading through the paragraphs, each paragraph as a chunk without stopping. So what this means is you shouldn't be stopping during your deep read or your close read. You shouldn't be stopping for unknown vocabulary words. You should highlight them. So have a highlighter with you and highlight words that you don't know, but don't move away from the text. And what we mean by that is you shouldn't be jumping to your dictionary every time that you see a new word. If you do, you're really interrupting the thought process, you're interrupting the reading process, and especially it's very dangerous or very risky to go to a translation dictionary, because if you're translating these unknown words into a different language, now you're thinking in a different language. So you've moved yourself even further away from the text, but additionally, you don't know how accurate that translation is going to be. So what we encourage you to do instead is highlight the words you don't know, but keep reading through the entire paragraph. So after you finish each paragraph chunk, you should stop and you should ask yourself, what does this mean? And this question is really important because what you're doing here is you're taking time to pause and process and actually think. And if you're just reading straight through a text without stopping to take time to think about it, you'll find that you go almost into a robot mode or into almost like a zombie mode where you're reading, but you're not really acquiring any new information. So building the practice of stopping and questioning is a really good way to force yourself to interact more deeply with the text. Now, the next step or next sub-step is for you to summarize your understanding in those paragraph chunks. So for each paragraph, you should try to write down one sentence. What is the main idea of this paragraph? Okay, now we're going to move into step 3. This is what we like to call the cleanup read. And this is where you're going to go back and you're going to deal with any sections or any words or any phrases that were not clear in the first read. You're going to get in there and clean up your understanding. So go back and look up all of the highlighted vocabulary, all of the words that you underlined or highlighted, and reread the sentences or paragraphs that you find them in after you have checked the definition. And as I mentioned, we really recommend using an English dictionary for this, even for international students, because the more you force yourself to think in English, the greater what you're doing is you're actually building a more powerful skill set of language strategies there. So we recommend that students use English to English dictionaries, and one website that is an excellent resource is dictionary.com. So once you've double checked the meaning for these new words and new terms, you go back and you reread the sentences with your improved understanding and try to make sense of what they mean. Another strategy that we like to suggest during this cleanup phase is students constantly come to us and say that they want to improve their academic vocabulary. So one thing that I tell my students is, look, if you're not tracking this new information while you're actually learning it, so during the reading phase, if you're not actually tracking the new vocabulary, how can you expect to acquire these new words? So you've now looked up these words, hopefully on dictionary.com, so collect them. Provide yourself with a specialized academic vocabulary notebook and write down these words with their English definitions so that you can study them for making sure that you're actually going to remember them. The rule of thumb is if you don't use new vocabulary, it won't become part of your active vocabulary network. So what we really encourage students to do is try to use new words once they have a strong understanding of what they mean. You should try to use them. And what I do for myself when I'm studying is if I'm learning a new word, I'll make sure that I use that word at least 5 times throughout the day when I learn it. It can seem a little bit strange as a strategy, but what we've learned from studying the neurology of the human brain is that unless you touch that knowledge at least 3 times, no pathway in your brain will be made for storing that knowledge. So you have to touch the knowledge several times and retouch that knowledge in order to consolidate that learning. So we also recommend that in this cleanup phase, now that you're learning these new academic words and you're rereading the sections, if this changes or modifies your understanding of that paragraph, you need to go back and strengthen your summary notes that you're making in the margin based on your new understanding. And one thing that we really see as being a really good benefit for students is these marginal notes that you're making. They're very powerful tools for when you want to go back and review what you learned in that chapter or in that article. If you've got a strong understanding of what you've read and you've made the notes in the margin beside hand, it becomes much easier for you to conduct your review for midterms or finals and things like that. Okay, step 4, this is a very important step. It's the prioritization of learning. And so basically what you're going to be doing is you're going to, now that you've read through, you've pre-read, you've done a close read, you've done your cleanup read, now you're going to go back and look at the article or the chapter as a whole, and you're going to ask yourself, what learning is valuable? Out of the learning that I've just done, which learning is most valuable for me? What can I take away? What can I use in a research paper or an essay, or if you're studying for midterms or finals, what's the most powerful learning? So again, the way that you should do this, you're going to look again at all of your notes and summaries, look at all those new vocabulary words, look at the titles and subtitles, and then you're going to ask yourself the following question, following 3 questions in fact. 1, what was the most powerful learning offered by this text? And you can even prioritize these things if you want to. First most important, second most important, third most important, like this. Number 2, what will be useful for helping me to complete my assignment? And so what we find is that a lot of the reading we do in university is specifically based towards an assignment like a midterm or a paper or a research paper or an essay. And so you really need to think, which of the learning is going to help me to do this task that I have to do? And finally, number 3, what future learning or additional learning do I need to do to consolidate my takeaway or the knowledge that I've gathered in this process? So now you're kind of projecting forward and thinking, what other research, what other articles do I need to read so that I understand these concepts with greater depth? So finally, you want to highlight and clarify which sections will be most useful for you in terms of research for essays or even review for midterms and finals. Okay, finally, we're going to move on to step 5. And this is the reflection phase. It's very important that you do this phase. So at the end of this intensive reading process, it's a really good idea to stop and give yourself time to think about what you've learned, what you're going to take away from the entire process. And again, there's a few questions that you can ask yourself here to help crystallize the learning. Number 1, ask yourself again, what did I actually learn from this entire process? Number 2, you can also think about how can you streamline your reading process when you move into your next attempt. And finally, number 3, what academic vocabulary did I take away from this process? So giving yourself time to reflect will also allow you to deepen your overall takeaway knowledge. So these are just a few strategies, a 5-step kind of process that we encourage you to use. And as I mentioned before, when you initially try this type of process, it can seem rigorous, it can be challenging and difficult, but if you actually really take on this type of process and utilize it regularly, it will get quicker, your reading speed will increase as well, and you'll start to really view your academic reading as a powerful way to learn and to take away knowledge that you can utilize for your other projects, your other assignments that you'll have to complete for your courses. Okay, so if you have any questions or concerns about the issues brought up in this short online tutorial, we really encourage you to drop by our office. Both Bruce and I are willing to discuss these strategies in depth, or you can email us at englishsupport@viu.ca. And if you want to talk about this particular online tutorial, just put online tutorial reading strategies in the subject line of your email. Okay, thank you very much for listening, and good luck with your studies.